It was a little past midnight when I pulled into the parking lot of Dollar Haven. The place was nearly deserted, just a few cars scattered around. I'd meant to run this errand earlier, but work had dragged on longer than I'd expected. All I needed was some cleaning supplies, maybe a snack to get me through the rest of the night. As I stepped out of my car, I noticed something odd. The air was still, completely still. No wind, no distant sounds of traffic, not even the usual buzz of the nearby highway. It was like the world had gone quiet all at once. A chill ran through me, but I brushed it off as nothing more than the late hour. The glass doors slid open as I approached, and the fluorescent lights inside buzzed overhead. That sterile, artificial glow gave the store an unsettling feeling. It didn't help that the place was dead quiet. The typical chatter, the clanging of items being stocked, none of it was there. Just silence. A bored-looking cashier, some kid probably a few years younger than me, sat behind the counter, eyes glued to his phone. He didn't even bother to look up as I walked past. Grabbing a basket, I made my way through the aisles, the sound of my sneakers squeaking against the linoleum, the only noise in the whole store. Cleaning supplies were easy to find, so I tossed a few items in and headed toward the snacks. I wasn't planning on lingering, not in this eerie quiet. That's when I saw him. At first I thought it was a mannequin. Standing at the far end of the snack aisle, nearly hidden behind a wall of hanging potato chips, was a man in a long dark coat and a wide-brimmed hat. He was perfectly still, so much so that I almost didn't register him as a person. Something about the way he just stood there, not moving, not shifting his weight like a normal person would, set off alarms in my head. I kept my distance, pretending to browse the snack shelves, though I wasn't really seeing what was in front of me. My eyes kept drifting back to him. He hadn't moved an inch. I thought about going up to him, asking if he needed help, but something in the pit of my stomach told me to stay far, far away. I tried to ignore him, focusing on picking up a few bags of chips, but my heart was racing, and I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Each time I glanced at him, I expected to see some sort of movement, even the slightest twitch. But no, he was a statue, looming at the end of the aisle like a silent shadow. Suddenly, I froze. His head moved, just a small tilt, but it was enough. He was looking at me. Even though I couldn't see his face beneath that wide-brimmed hat, I felt his gaze lock onto me. It was cold, calculating, as if he was studying me, deciding something. My throat tightened. I was out of my depth, alone in an empty store with a man who shouldn't be there. I didn't know why, but I knew I had to leave. Now. Without a second thought, I abandoned my basket right there in the aisle and started walking toward the front. I didn't dare run. Something in the way he stood, the subtle shift in his posture, told me that he could move faster than I ever could. My legs felt like lead, but I forced myself to keep walking, to act like nothing was wrong. Just grab the snacks and go, I told myself. But every step felt heavier than the last. As I neared the checkout counter, I glanced toward the cashier, hoping, begging, that he'd notice something was off. He didn't. He didn't even glance up from his phone. It was like I was the only one who could see what was happening. I reached the glass doors, my hand shaking as I pushed them open. The little bell above jingled as I stepped outside, the sound far too cheerful for the situation. I didn't run, not until I was a few steps from my car. Then I bolted, keys clenched in my fist, as I sprinted the last few feet. My hands fumbled as I unlocked the door, throwing myself into the driver's seat and slamming the door shut. I started the engine, heart pounding in my chest, and peeled out of the parking lot as fast as I could. But I had to look. Something in me, some primal fear, forced my eyes back toward the store, and there, standing in the doorway, was the man. He wasn't standing still anymore. His body was half in shadow, but I could see enough to know he was watching me. Even from that distance, I could feel the weight of his gaze. Cold, unforgiving. I didn't stop driving until I was halfway across town, my knuckles white from gripping the steering wheel. I couldn't explain what had just happened. I didn't want to think about it, but I couldn't stop seeing him, that shadow in the aisle, the way he had just watched me, as if waiting for something. For days after, I couldn't shake the feeling of being followed. I'd catch glimpses of movement out of the corner of my eye, dark shapes that disappeared the moment I turned my head. At night, I'd wake up, heart racing, convinced someone was standing at the foot of my bed, just watching. I stopped going out late. I stopped going to that Dollar Haven altogether. I told myself it was paranoia, that it was just a weird encounter with a creepy guy, but deep down I knew. That night, I saw something that shouldn't have been there, and even now I'm not sure it's over. Sometimes, late at night, when the house is quiet, I'll hear it, a soft shuffle, like footsteps just outside my door, and I wonder if he's still out there, watching, waiting. They say there's a place for everyone, and for me, it was the Dollar Tree on Elm Street. It wasn't the glamorous job I imagined after graduating college, but I needed the money, and the store hours worked with my schedule. I had heard the whispers, of course. Everyone in town had. The store had a reputation, phantom footsteps, strange cold spots, things moving when no one was around. Urban legends, I thought. The kind of stories people tell to pass the time. I wasn't one to believe in ghost stories, until that night. It started like any other closing shift. I was the last employee left with Emily, a cashier a few years younger than me. The last customers trickled out, and the store's overhead lights cast a dull, fluorescent glow over the aisles. It was quiet, almost too quiet, except for the hum of the refrigerators in the back. Emily was in the back, stocking shelves while I stayed up front, organizing the dollar toys near the checkout. Around 9:45, just before closing, I noticed something strange. A pile of toys on the counter, plastic dinosaurs and stuffed animals, had been knocked over. I hadn't heard anyone touch them. I shrugged it off, figured maybe I'd brushed against them without realizing it. I set the toys back up. That's when I heard the first sound. A faint, soft tap, tap, tap coming from one of the aisles. I stopped and listened, trying to locate where it was coming from. Maybe Emily had knocked something over. I called out to her. "Emily?" No response. The tapping continued. I followed the noise weaving through the aisles, my footsteps echoing on the cold tile floor. The closer I got to the back of the store, the colder the air became. I remember my breath catching in my throat as I turned the corner. The cold hit me like a wall. Then I saw it. A can of soup rolled out from behind one of the shelves, as if someone had nudged it. I stood frozen, staring at it, waiting for someone to appear. But no one did. Just the silence and the oppressive cold. I could feel my skin crawling, my nerves tightening. "Emily?" I called again, louder this time, trying to shake the growing unease. Suddenly the lights flickered. Once, twice, then steady again. My pulse quickened, but I tried to stay calm. Old buildings, faulty wiring. There had to be a reasonable explanation. I made my way to the back, where Emily had been. As I turned another corner, I saw her standing at the end of the aisle, her back to me. She wasn't moving, just standing there, motionless. "Emily?" I asked, my voice sounding smaller than I intended. She didn't respond. I walked closer, my heart thudding in my chest. "Emily, are you okay?" When I was just a few feet away, she turned to face me. Her eyes were wide, her face pale. I've never seen someone look so terrified. It touched me," she whispered, barely audible. "Something cold." Before I could ask what she meant, the lights flickered again, this time plunging us into complete darkness for a split second. In that moment of blackness, I heard it. A whisper, right next to my ear. "Get out." It wasn't Emily's voice. It wasn't even a voice I recognized. It was low, raspy, filled with a malice so thick it made my stomach churn. When the lights came back on, Emily screamed. We ran. We didn't speak. We didn't think. We just ran. We burst into the back room, slamming the employees-only door behind us. I could hear Emily's ragged breathing, her panic. My own heart was racing, and for the first time I realized my hands were shaking uncontrollably. "Did you hear it?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. I nodded. The voice. The whisper. She nodded back, her eyes filled with tears. We sat there for a moment, too scared to move, trying to make sense of what had just happened. But there was no sense to be made. There was something in that store, something that wasn't human, something that didn't want us there. Finally, Emily spoke. "I'm done. I can't work here anymore." I didn't blame her, but I couldn't just leave. The manager would ask questions, and besides, I needed this job. So I told myself I would stay, just until I found something else. The next few nights were worse. Every shift I felt it. The cold, the whispers. I saw shadows darting between aisles when no one else was around. Sometimes I would catch a glimpse of movement out of the corner of my eye, only for it to disappear when I turned my head. I started hearing the whisper more often. At first it was the same words, "Get out." But then it began to change. The voice was more insistent, more angry. "You don't belong here." I started losing sleep. I would lie awake at night, staring at the ceiling, dreading the next shift. My friends noticed I wasn't myself. But how could I explain? How could I tell them that I was being haunted by some unseen force at a Dollar Tree? Then, one night, it escalated. I was alone in the store, doing inventory after closing. Emily had quit, and I was the last one left. The store was dead silent, save for the occasional hum of the refrigerators. I was in the toy aisle, counting the boxes of action figures, when the cold hit me again. This time it wasn't just a chill. It was a suffocating cold, wrapping around me like icy fingers. My breath came out in short gasps, and my vision blurred. I turned to leave, but something stopped me. The voice. "You should have left." It was louder this time, echoing through the aisle, reverberating off the shelves. I stumbled backward, knocking over a display of toys. And then I saw it. A figure, standing at the far end of the aisle, tall, shadowy, and featureless, like a silhouette carved out of the darkness. It didn't move, didn't speak, but I could feel its hatred burning through me. I ran. I didn't stop until I was outside, the cold night air hitting my face like a slap. I quit the next day. I never went back. The Dollar Tree on Elm Street still stands, still open, still whispering its secrets to anyone brave or foolish enough to listen. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting a harsh, unforgiving glow on the brightly colored aisles of Dollar Mart. I pushed my cart slowly, scanning the shelves for the birthday candles I needed. It was late, too late, but I'd forgotten to pick them up earlier, and my son's birthday cake wouldn't be complete without them. The store was eerily quiet, only a few other shoppers scattered throughout, their figures lost in the fluorescent haze. As I found the cheerful rainbow assortment of candles and tossed them into my basket, I felt a chill. The air was thick with an unsettling silence, broken only by the faint strains of a pop song playing from the cashier's radio, a jarring melody that felt out of place. I shook off the feeling, reminding myself that I was just tired and on edge. I rounded a corner, collecting the last few items on my list, when I noticed him. A man stood at the end of the aisle, his back to me, seemingly engrossed in a display of discount greeting cards. He was tall and thin, wearing a dark hoodie pulled low over his head, obscuring his face. I thought little of it at first, assuming he was just another late-night shopper. But as I made my way deeper into the store, unease curled in my stomach like a coiling snake. Every time I turned a corner, I caught a glimpse of the man in the hoodie, always a few aisles behind, always keeping his distance. My heart quickened. I quickened my pace, trying to dismiss the rising tide of anxiety. Maybe it was just my imagination, but the prickle of being watched was hard to ignore. I approached the checkout, stealing another glance over my shoulder. The man was gone. Relief washed over me, mixed with a lingering embarrassment. What was I thinking? I was just being paranoid. I paid for my items, my hands trembling slightly as I counted out cash, feeling foolish for letting my imagination run wild. Stepping into the cool night air felt like stepping into another world, the vibrant lights of the Dolomart fading behind me. I hurried to my car, keys clutched tightly in my hand. The moment I unlocked the door and slid behind the wheel, a chill shot down my spine. In my rearview mirror, a dark figure loomed against the brightly lit storefront. It was him. The man in the hoodie was watching me. Panic surged through me, cold and primal. I started my car, the engine roaring to life, and sped out of the parking lot. My heart pounded in my chest as I glanced in the mirror. He was still there, standing still, a shadow in the night. I forced myself to focus on the road, gripping the steering wheel as I took a deep breath. But the feeling of being hunted gnawed at me. I couldn't shake the thought that I was being followed. I glanced in the rearview mirror repeatedly, each car that pulled up behind me sending a jolt of terror through my veins. The streets blurred around me as I tried to remember every turn I'd taken, hoping to lose whoever was trailing me. Instead of heading straight home, I took a detour, weaving through brightly lit, busy streets, my mind racing. I checked the mirror again, every flicker of headlights casting shadows on my skin. I felt like prey, my heart pounding to the rhythm of a chase that felt surreal, like a nightmare I couldn't wake up from. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, I pulled into my driveway. My house, bathed in the warm glow of the porch light, looked like an oasis amidst the darkness. I rushed inside, locking the door behind me, a flood of relief washing over me. My hands shook as I leaned against the door, taking a moment to gather myself. The safety of my home enveloped me, but that sense of security was short-lived. A noise, soft but unmistakable, echoed from the back of the house. My heart raced again. Had I really lost him? I moved cautiously, every creak of the floorboards sounding like a shout in the stillness. I peered into the kitchen. Nothing. The only sound was the rhythmic ticking of the clock on the wall, each tick echoing my increasing dread. I grabbed a knife from the block, my grip tightening around the handle, knuckles white. I had to check the back door. Maybe I'd left it unlocked in my rush. As I stepped toward the hallway, I thought I heard a faint whisper, just a breath against the silence. I froze. My instincts screamed at me to retreat, but curiosity pushed me forward. I glanced into the living room where the shadows danced in the dim light, but still nothing stirred. I finally reached the back door. My hand trembled as I turned the knob, half expecting it to be locked. It wasn't. The door creaked open slowly, and a rush of cold air swept through, sending chills racing down my spine. And then I saw it. Footprints in the fresh snow outside, leading up to my door. My breath caught in my throat. I hadn't heard anyone approach, hadn't noticed anything amiss. My heart hammered as I stepped back, the knife held tightly in my hand. Suddenly the sound of scraping echoed from the front of the house, followed by the unmistakable sound of a heavy footfall. My blood ran cold as I realized he hadn't just been watching me. He was waiting. I turned and sprinted back to the living room, locking the back door, heart pounding in my ears. The front door burst open, and I could see the silhouette of the man in the hoodie framed against the threshold. He stepped inside, the darkness swallowing him whole as he closed the door behind him. I backed away, gripping the knife tighter, every muscle in my body screaming to flee. But I was frozen. The figure advanced slowly, deliberately, and I could see the glint of something sharp in his hand. As he drew closer, I could finally make out his face, obscured by the shadow of the hood. My heart stopped. It was then that I realized, even in the mundane, there are terrors lurking, waiting for the right moment to strike.